Lydia is the Archives Digitization Project Manager at Sandy Springs Museum, which is a community-driven cultural arts and heritage center in Sandy Spring, Maryland. Lydia has been with Sandy Spring Museum since 2015, and before that worked at the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C. in multiple roles over 18 years, including collections management, curatorial work, and library and archives management. She has a bachelor's degree in Asian studies and a graduate degree in information science with a focus on classification and knowledge organization. Her recent passion in her work has been addressing inequities in cataloging and metadata and developing strategies to redress these inequities in the museum's information management system. And I will go ahead and let Lydia talk about this project and what they've been doing at Sandy Spring.
Oh, thanks. I'm really happy to see everyone today. As with many institutions, our transcription project blossomed during COVID in 2020. It took an outsized programmatic role for the entire institution, and I have to say it delivered beautifully. Rather than looking back, however, today I would like to look ahead and share how our FromThePage transcription platform is integral to a future project called Equity and Metadata, about which we are exceedingly excited. So for a bit of background, Sandy Spring is a community located about 17 miles from Washington, D.C. that was founded by Quakers, and prior to the mid-20th century was entirely rural. Historically, Sandy Spring was considered both a town and a neighborhood, the latter encompassing a 6-mile radius from the Quaker meeting house. Apparently, this was a reasonable distance to be traveled by horse at the time. Also, within that same 6-mile radius are a number of historically Black communities established in the early 1800s by a sizable free Black population. Many attribute Quaker activism in the abolition of slavery and the community's storied role in the Underground Railroad for fostering a safe, hospitable environment for these communities to evolve. In fact, by 1900, the number of Sandy Springs residents of color surpassed that of its white residents. And yet the bulk of the museum's historic archives singularly represent this dominant white Quaker culture. As we initially embarked on our digitization and transcription projects, our expectations and assumptions were that little in our collection spoke to the history and stories of more than 50% of our historic population, that is, our historically Black communities. What we discovered, however, is that a great deal of information does indeed exist, yet it is buried deep within the content of these documents. Take, for example, and I'm just going to show you this from our collections. So this doctor's ledger here, we had a local doctor, his name was Dr. Caleb Edward Iddings. I'm using content DM here. And so here we have within this doctor's ledger, we have entries for Eleanor Bell. We understand that she's a person of color. We now know where she lives and who her husband worked for. Also in this document, we know that one of her infant daughters was born with, what did he call it, superfluous fingers. So there's a bit of a medical family history here. And then I'll go to this next ledger. So he sees them for a number of years, and we have his ledgers that go from 1881 through to 1904. So here we have the same folks here. We learn within the interim years here that they've moved and they now live on his employer's property. We also see that the family's established a relationship with the doctor and their family in that they are now paying off their medical bills by doing work. They're bartering. They've entered into an informal arranged economy with the doctor. So there's an incredible amount of information about the Bells that we can glean simply from these ledgers. So the item level metadata you will see here, oops, sorry, I just had to get rid of this. You guys are, apologies, there we go. All right, so the item level metadata that we apply to these documents generally favor favor the Dr. Iddings and his family. Yet there's an enormous amount of information specifically related to the Bells and similar families. And likewise for the numerous farm ledgers and store ledgers and such in our collections. The inability to search the content of these kinds of documents perpetuates the inaccessibility of this information. Thus, looking ahead, we are planning a project that both assigns page-level metadata and prioritizes transcription of this material on FromThePage. As you can imagine, we are incredibly pleased and excited with FromThePage's introduction of structured text transcription that is obviously a critical piece in transcribing this material. Finally, given the intimacy with which our transcribers interact with the documents on FromThePage, we also see it as an opportunity for citizen archivists to unearth these hidden histories, both overt, like these ledgers, and the more tacit, for example, say an 18th century receipt for a shipment of tobacco from a local plantation that used slave labor to cultivate it. And already here we have, we use a lot of our students, local students getting their service hours to transcribe these documents. And we had a student here that used the notes section and identified some material related to the Black community in our community. Yeah, anyway, so that's it. Thanks.